Joining me right now is immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bhangal. Good morning to you, Harjap.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So we've got lots of statements from prime ministers, the Shadow Home Secretary. We're going to come to those in a moment. But in terms of the legal ruling, as the Prime Minister's statement has said, this was backing up the ruling in principle from basically the High Court and the Court of Appeal. There is nothing in principle wrong or unlawful about a government saying we're going to send people to another country, to another jurisdiction, to be processed and to serve out, if they are granted asylum, to serve out their lives in another country. The issue was with specifics in Rwanda in terms of the treatment of people in Rwanda, the asylum processing system, and also, crucially, whether or not there was going to have this risk of, and it's, I have to say, a new word to me, refoulement, which is the forcible return of refugees to a country where they're liable to be persecuted. Do you think, therefore, that this was, although a loss for the government, actually, they can actually make some key changes and then get a win?
Well, let's put it in layman terms. Basically, what the Supreme Court has said and what the courts have said, potentially the scheme is okay, the idea is okay to send people to a third country to be processed. However, they chose the wrong country, and that's because they haven't got return agreements with other countries. So what they've said is that if they continue with the Rwanda plan, then there's a risk of refoulement. It's called, as they say in French, it's a French word, which means sending a refugee back to a country where they will be at risk of persecution or torture. So essentially, and that they used the evidence of what Israel had done, sending people to Rwanda, and then they'd found subsequently that people had absconded or people were missing or they'd been sent back to countries where they were persecuted. And the court just wasn't convinced that Rwanda had the system in place to, make good on its deal and on its side of the bargain, as it were. So the government now is back to a position where it'll have to go around touting to other countries to try and get another deal, potentially, or they might just knock it on the head altogether, or they just might try and carry on with the rhetoric that we're going to do this, or potentially they could just try and do what common sense dictates, and that's stop the small boats and stop the gangs that are sending people over.
Well, again, I think everyone's saying that's what they've been trying to do. I mean, to all credit to people trying to do that, but it's not working. There is a lot of money to be made. You can arrest every single illegal people trafficker today. Tomorrow there'll be another few hundred turning up. There's so much money to be made. There is a pool of people wanting to come to this country, even though they're in a perfectly safe country like France. I don't see how you're going to stop that unless people know you arrive on our shores, you get on a dinghy in Calais, you arrive on our shores, you're out of here. But even the Rwanda policy didn't deliver that. I mean, goodness me, I've lost track of the number of times you and I, Harjap, have discussed this.
Yeah.
We're looking at best, if this ever happens, a few hundred people at best being put on those planes. Given that we get sometimes up to 1,000 in a day arriving, I mean, if I were an illegal migrant getting on one of those rickety boats, willing to take the odds in the channel with one of the busiest shipping lanes in the country in an overcrowded dinghy, I reckon I'd be willing to take those odds.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to take a mixture of stuff, Julia. What doesn't help is it takes 2 years to decide an asylum claim, and therefore people develop lives here, and then they can get the permission to work after 1 year. What also doesn't help is that we don't remove people anymore. Our removals have gone down from 60,000 under a Labour government, which you were talking about just a minute ago, and it's ironic that Labour, as a party that seems to be soft on immigration, actually have a better track record at sending people back than the Conservative government do. And last year, the enforced removals was just 3,000. Even before Brexit, on 2015, it was 5,000. So this has been slowly going down.
A lot of people say it's down to Brexit, it's down to government not having good relations with EU countries, but it had already plummeted beforehand. What was the reason why it plummeted, though? Wasn't it, as Rishi Sunak, I'm sure, is going to say in PMQs in 20 minutes' times, it was the lefty lawyers and judges?
No, well, lawyers have been around since the 1980s and 90s, and the Human Rights Act has been around since 2000.
They have cockroaches.
Yeah, and the Human Rights Act and the human rights laws have been around since 2002. So if lawyers and the Human Rights Act stopped it, how comes they didn't stop them in 2009 and 2010? What's happened is either there's a political will, there's a lack of investment in the Home Office. The Home Office is not fit for purpose. For a start, and how we're continuing with this machinery and expecting it to function when the own MPs and the Home Office boss tells us, look, I haven't got the tools to work with, here. It's just beyond me. So there's a whole mixture of stuff that needs to be done. The gangs do need to be caught, Julia, and they do need to be sentenced, not just to 2 or 3 years like we've seen in prison recently when one does get caught, but lifetime. And so if we know where they operate from, they operate from the French coast. Even the kids know that. We know where they send them to, the Kent coast. They've been using the same route for 20 years. Yet for some reason, we seem to think the equivalent of locking up drug users is going to stop drug dealing, locking up asylum seekers is going to stop people smuggling. And it's not going to work. The Rwanda scheme has a maximum capacity of 500 places. And what people don't know is we have to take about 200 of Rwandans back out of that as part of the deal. So we could have a net of 300. What are we going to do with the 49,700 other people that are crossing the channel? Now, 49,700 crossing a channel is not a problem if you're sending 60,000 back, like Labour were in 2009. The problem is when you've got 50,000 coming every year and you're only sending back 3,000 a year.
Okay,
you build up a surplus.
We can do the maths. It doesn't work. Again, it's very interesting because I've got Benedict Spence, who's a Conservative commentator, live in the studio with me today, and we were saying, we said this again, we talked about this so many times, this is not a new topic for us here at TalkTV, that, you know, no one sane thinks the Rwanda policy is going to make a blind bit of difference to the number of people who come to this country. It's going to make a dent in the numbers who are here. It's kind of a sort of a principle, and it's a PR exercise by the government to say we can actually control our borders, when, of course, we can't. Let me just read you a few statements. I want to get your thoughts, Harjap Singh Bhangal, as someone who's written, talked about this for many, many years as an immigration lawyer. The statement from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, where he said that this was not the outcome we wanted, but we've spent the last few months planning for all eventualities and remain completely committed to stopping the boats. Later on, he says we will stop the boats. That's one of his 5 pledges. In the letter from Suella Braverman, which sent yesterday, she said basically quite clearly, there isn't a plan B. You haven't got any plans. He does point out the principle has been upheld of the right of the country to send illegal migrants to a safe third country. But he does say, that they're planning for these eventualities and that they are going to take action. We've had the Home Secretary, the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, talking about the partnership with Rwanda. He says, while bold and ambitious, is just one part of a vehicle of measures to stop the boats and tackle illegal migration. He also points out there is appetite for this concept, pointing out that Italy, Germany and Austria are all exploring similar models to our partnership, he says, with Rwanda. Also, Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary. Everyone's been having the tuppence worth today. She's responded saying the Prime Minister's flagship policy has completely failed. She calls it a damning judgment on his Rwanda policy. It's already cost £140 million of taxpayers' money, that money sent to the Rwanda government to prepare. She says this exposes Rishi Sunak's failure to get any grip or have any serious plan to tackle dangerous boat crossings which are undermining border security and putting lives at risk. She said Labour argued from the start this plan is unworkable and extortionately expensive. And she says ministers knew about the weaknesses in this scheme from the start, yet they insisted on making it their flagship policy. Who do you agree with?
I think there's an element of truth in all of those statements, and there's also an element of untruths in that sort of statement. Instead of using Rwanda as a deterrent, which we know doesn't work and is never going to work, we've just discussed that, why don't we bring back the fast-track asylum system? If we're talking about deterring asylum seekers, surely that would be better if they knew that once they come here, they're going to be dealt with under a fast track. In 16 days, their claim might be finished, and on the 20th day, they might be sent back. We used to have that system in 2001 and 2002. I know, I was on the scheme. So we used to have that at Harmondsworth. You'd come in at the airport, claim asylum, you'd be detained, your whole hearing, determination, your claim would be dealt with in about 15 days. And people were put back on a plane on 20 days.
There's no way in the world the lawyers are going to allow that to happen. Not a chance.
But it was happening. It was happening. It was happening, Julia. Look at the figures.
It was happening. That wouldn't be allowed anymore.
It was happening. It worked. This government, in its wisdom, abandoned all of that. So you have to wonder why that was abandoned. Now, why does a claim that takes 15 days to determine, when the nature of claims hasn't changed that much, war-torn countries, disputes, whatever, life's in danger, now take 2 years? Yeah. That just is not right. If you were doing a job 20 years ago and it took 15 days to do, and it took you 2 years to do now. You and me would be out on our ear.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
no, I'm
And not- we
genuinely,
wouldn't be
I
rewarded.
genuinely, I'd sack the entire Home Office and then rehire back on the basis of no, we really, this is how drastic the situation is. There isn't, I don't think there's a political will. I don't think there's a civil service will.
Yeah.
And they're all working from
Suella
home.
talks about a lack of a plan B. Suella talks. Well, she was there to implement it. She's a barrister herself. She's held one of the highest positions in the legal system in the country, and her friends are judges and her colleagues are barristers. And she had an army of government lawyers to implement Plan Bs. So it seems like she's trying to cover her bases and say, well, hold on. I try and told Rishi. Rishi's saying, well, hold on. It's her fault. Everyone's blaming each other. The fact is, no one's got a sensible solution, which is to speed up processing, catch the gangs, invest in catching the gangs, have returns agreements,
You said that,
start sending people back, and make sort of safe routes for people to come over.
Except the lawyers don't allow you to do half of that stuff. Harjap, we're going to have to leave it there. Harjap Singh Bhangal, thank you very much indeed.